In a slightly sadistic way, I reckon we all like to be at least a little freaked out, or a little scared, maybe even terrified. I don't know about you, but I have noticed on the internet, people seem to love to be scared, freaked out, and terrified. So, for your listening pleasure tonight, I bring you scary stories of children and their imaginary friends. Without further ado, close the blinds, dim those lights, cuddle under your favorite blanket, and let's begin. Number 1. The Punishment. Okay, I was 17 and babysitting a friend of the family's 6-year-old. He'd been in bed a couple of hours, and I decided to just go take a peek and check on him. He wasn't in the bed when I checked, so I opened the door wider. When I did, I saw him standing in the corner, facing the wall. Then, the creepiest thing ever. I asked him what he was doing, and all he did was turn around, smile, and put his finger to his lips, as if to say, "Shh." I asked him again what he was doing, and all he said was, "Leave us. It is the punishment." Number 2. Betsy. Okay, I only tell this story because I hope my family is screwing with me. But maybe not. My mom left us when I was 5, and my dad worked a lot, and went out drinking more nights than not, so no one kept a good eye on my sister and me. We had to move into a cheaper house, and I made friends with a girl in our new neighborhood named Betsy. She showed me where the train tracks and the broken down treehouse were in the woods by our house. She was the only friend I had, and I remember her clearly. We played in the woods, rode bikes, had slumber parties, normal girl stuff. I started seeing less and less of her when I got older, and she eventually moved away, closer to the school she went to. I was over at my dad and stepmom's house a couple of years ago, and I told a story about her, and my dad laughed at me and told me Betsy was imaginary. To which I corrected him, no, she wasn't. She even came over with us to my aunt's house for Thanksgiving one year. My dad got serious and said, "No, there was never anyone there. You would just go up to your room and play and talk to yourself when Betsy came over." And my sister agreed with him. This point, I'm pretty upset, and I get out my phone and text my aunt, who also replied, "No, you brought an imaginary friend to Thanksgiving that year." Now, I would let it go and just chalk it up to the mind of a child is amazing. But a couple of things freak me out. 1, I very clearly remember her, what she looked like, how she sounded. I even have a very vague recollection of her room. Not her house, just her room. Number 2, where in the heck did I go when I went to her house for a sleepover? I asked my dad this question, and he tells me it's the reason he doesn't drink anymore. Number 3. The Creeper Man. My son, from the age of 3, always told me about the Creeper Man, who lives in my mom and dad's room. He brings it up after every visit with him. I made the mistake once of asking him what he looked like. My son replied, "Oh, he doesn't have a face." Number 4. The Captain. A parent of one of my students told us in a meeting that she was concerned about her son, who was 7 years old. He talked about an invisible ghost who would talk to him and play with him in his room. He said the ghost was called the Captain, and he was an old white guy with a beard. The kid would tell his mom that the Captain told him when he grows up, his job will be to kill people. And the Captain would tell him who needed to be killed. The kid would cry and say he doesn't want to kill them when he grows up. But the Captain tells him he doesn't have a choice, and he'll get used to killing after a while. I was always creeped out working with that student after that. Number 5. Kelly. When my daughter was 3, she had an imaginary friend named Kelly, who lived in her closet. Kelly sat in a little rocking chair while she slept, playing with her, etc. Typical imaginary friend stuff. Anyway, fast forward 2 years later, my husband and myself were watching the new Amityville Horror, the one with Ryan Reynolds, and our daughter walks out right when the dead girl goes all black-eyed. Far from being disturbed, she said, "That looks like Kelly." Who's Kelly?" we say. "You know, the dead girl that lived in my closet." Number 6. Roger. My little brother's imaginary friend, Roger, lived under our coffee table. Roger had a wife and 9 kids. Roger and his family lived peacefully alongside us for 3 years. One day, my little brother announced that Roger wouldn't be around anymore, since he shot and killed himself and his whole family. Since he shot and killed himself and his whole family. I don't know if he remembers any of this, but his genuine lack of remorse was very disturbing. Number 7. The Boy. My folks' farm surrounded a cemetery, and my dad and my niece were walking down there. My niece, 4, looks up and says, "What's that boy doing up there in that tree?" There was no boy, but she insisted there was and could describe him. Number 8. The Easter Bunny. When I was 16, I babysat twins who were in the 3rd grade at the time. They always spoke of a man in an Easter Bunny costume, and they were terrified of him. One day, I was babysitting, and one twin was in the shower. His brother and I were sitting downstairs watching television when all of a sudden he said, "You need to go check on Matt." Seconds later, Matt yelled, "He's in here! He's in here!" I ran upstairs, and I had to check every room before he would calm down. I'm not sure which part of the experience freaked me out the most. Edit. The rabbit had no name, and this was not a one-time sighting. This happens to be only the freakiest encounter that I had while babysitting. The man in the costume came up many times, often surfacing in the garage, rarely in the house. For 2 3rd graders to pull through with a running gag like this isn't out of the question, but it would certainly be elaborate. After knowing the kids for a while, you can sense their emotions, and their emotions were only fear when they spoke of what they had seen. Number 9. Jessica. A little after I was born, my sister Julia had an imaginary friend named Jessica. She was Julia's friend for a long time when things started to get a little weird. At first, my parents shrugged it off as a normal occurrence, but after a while, they began to believe that our house was haunted. One night, as my parents put me, I think I was about a year old, to sleep, I began to cry and point at the corner. My mom was still in there and began to try to comfort me, but I continued to cry and point at the same corner. All of a sudden, my sister walks into my room and points at the corner and yells, "Jessica, stop it!" Immediately, I stop crying, and Julia says it is completely normal that sometimes Jessica likes to put on a scary mask and scare people. My mom, who was understandably freaked out, stammers to my sister, "Tell Jessica that if she can't play nice, she can't play at all." A couple of weeks go by, and Julia tells Mom that her eyes turn green when she's mad, and her voice gets deeper. My mom didn't know how to respond to this and just said, "Okay." Eventually, Julia outgrew her imaginary friend and stopped playing with her. A year and a half later, my little sister Abby begins to talk. She then goes on to tell us about her friend that no one else can see. She then tells my mom about her eyes turning green when she's upset. I remember this distinctly because she dropped a pan and it scared me. She asked Abby what her name was, and she said, "Jessica." Number 10. Maury. Okay, I'm not a parent, but I do have a story about a little cousin and his imaginary friend. Okay, first off, let's get into details. My aunt and uncle had just moved into a new house in Orlando, Florida, and my cousin never spoke to this imaginary friend before they moved. Let's call my cousin Kay. I go to their house one day while on vacation because I live in New York, and I'm pretty close to my little cousin because he used to live across the street from me, and I treated him like my brother. He was about 6 years old when this happened, and it still gives me chills to this day. I'm sleeping at their house for like a week, and I get this weird vibe coming from their place. The feeling of anxiety. I guess I could say anxiety. I really don't have anything else to compare it to. It would always be heightened at around 3 in the morning, because I always woke up to my little cousin next to my bed in the attic. The attic was remodeled and turned into a guest room, and he would always tell me about his friend Maury. Naturally, I was freaked out by it, especially since it was always around the same time at night. On the 4th night, I asked his parents about it, and they told me they had never experienced anything like that with him, and decided to ask him about it. He said he had no idea what they were talking about. Come the next night, at 3 a.m., I tried to have a conversation with him, and he keeps repeating 3 words. "Why'd you tell?" Over and over again, until I tried to talk to him, and he started telling me about how Maury would appear in his dreams at night and eat dinner with the family when they were at the table. I asked him how he got to meet Maury, and he told me that Maury came up to him and asked him if he could come inside, and he was always a very polite kid, and he said, "Yeah, sure, come in." That's when Maury started to talk to him, and would be by his bedside at night talking to Kay. Kay said he enjoyed Maury's company, and it made him feel safe. I told his parents the next day, and they got pretty scared. They thought I was making it up and didn't believe me. The next, and my final night there, I heard some faint thumping under my bed, and at this point, I'm scared to death. But I grew a pair, and I peeked under my bed to find my little cousin there. And these are the last words I heard from him before I got the heck out of that house. "I'm protecting you from Maury. He said he can't trust you and needs you gone. Maury won't hurt me if I protect you. I promise, I ran faster than I had ever ran before. I made it at least 3 blocks before my aunt and uncle started chasing after me and told me to stop. They asked me what happened, and they didn't believe me because when we went back upstairs, Kay was in his bed sound asleep. I went back home the next day. Fast forward a few years, I asked Kay if he remembered any of this, or of Maury, and he told me he had no idea what I was talking about, and left it at that. I never told anyone else besides his parents about this until now. Number 11. Scotty. Back in elementary school, I was about 6 or 7. I was close friends with this really social, awkward kid named Andrew, who had just moved in from out of state. He used to sit alone before my friend and I introduced ourselves, and just talk ever so quietly to himself, but he always appeared to be engaged during the conversations, if you will. The first and only time that I actually went over to his house, I had my friend tag along, and we were both going to be spending the night there. Well, the whole day went by, and it was all good. It was pretty fun. Andrew seemed different at home, a bit more normal, comfortable. Well, when we were going to sleep, I remember lying there in their basement/bedroom. Andrew was across the room on a couch, and my other buddy Ryan was asleep a few feet away from me on the floor. Andrew started making these eerie noises like a high-pitched but mellow scream, almost like a steaming tea kettle. But then he sits up, and I can only see his outline with how dark it was, but he stands up, still letting the screeching noise out, and I just see his outline walking toward me. So I kick Ryan awake, and he sits up. Both of us just freaked out at this point. Andrew keeps walking until he nearly is stepping on us, and just sits down and slowly lets the screech die out. Ryan and I look at each other, not sure what to do, and Andrew just grabbed Ryan's arm, and then mine, and he was squeezing like he was trying to crush it. In a disturbing low voice he says, "Scotty wants you both to leave." I rip my arm away, and so does Ryan, and Andrew stands up again and just stood there laughing like a super high-pitched laugh, staring at us. We both got up and suggested going to Andrew's mom's room to wake her up. Before we even took a step, Andrew just screams at the top of his lungs, literally horror movie stuff. On hearing the scream, his mom comes sprinting through the house and down the stairs and turns on all the lights. We couldn't tell in the dark, but Andrew's arms were ripped up with scratches, and he looked all around pale, just not right. His mom laid him on the ground and held him down and was trying to speak over his screams, and she was saying things like, "Scotty isn't real, Andy. You're okay." And she turns to us and tells us to head upstairs and put on our coats so she could take us home. We didn't talk to Andrew at school for the next couple of weeks, but when we asked him about it, he said, "It's okay now. You won't see Scotty anymore. No one will." Needless to say, that was the end of that, and we never talked to him again. Number 12. Mr. Man. I've been living in the same house I grew up my entire life. When I was little, around 5 or 6, I used to sleep in my parents' room because I was scared to sleep alone in my room. One night, I woke up and there was a man standing in the corner, wearing all black, with a shaved head, big eyes, sad mouth, and big ears. He just stood there, looking at me from the corner, with his hands in his pockets. I closed my eyes out of fear and drifted off to sleep. I wake up again about 15-20 minutes later, and the man is now standing at the foot of my bed, looking at me. His face was expressionless and kind of sad. I remember feeling scared and sad at the same time. I closed my eyes again, and when I opened them, he was gone. When I was around 8, I started calling him Mr. Man. This would happen about 2 times a week, every week until I was 11. I started to sleep in my own room at the age of 9. Embarrassing, I know. And Mr. Man would still show up. However, when I turned 15, he stopped. This was around the time that my grandfather Sammy passed away. And at the time, I thought the two were connected. I remember telling my mom about it. I remember telling my mom about what had been going on shortly after the funeral. Maybe a couple of days to a week after the funeral. And she had me taken to a therapist and get evaluated and all that BS. All they found was that I had ADD and ADHD. No signs of schizophrenia, which my mom was very scared of, as my father's mother was a paranoid schizophrenic. I wouldn't see Mr. Man for another 4 years. When I turned 18, I started noticing weird things happening around the house. The TV would turn on, or the volume would change rapidly. Doors would open and close, and I noticed our animals started to act weird. My dog Flower would bark at the hallway every now and then, or she would get up from my bed and stare at the door with her ears perked up. Our cats would get puffed up out of nowhere and hiss at nothing. I would hear footsteps walking by my room in the middle of the night. I thought it was my dad walking to the bathroom, as it's right next to my room. But as I got up to see who it was, the bathroom door was open and the light off. I checked my parents' room, and they both were in bed. I'm now 20 and still living with my parents, as I'm going to a local college. Just about a year ago, he showed back up. It was in the morning, around dawn. I heard my door open. I thought it might have been my dad or something, but he would usually shut the door once he saw I was still asleep. When I noticed the door wasn't shut, I woke up and turned to see a silhouette of a man looking through the crack of the door. At first I thought it was my dad, and I asked if it was him, but I didn't get a reply. It wasn't my dad. It was Mr. Man. This time he had a hat on. He just stayed there looking at me for a good 5 minutes. I remember when I noticed, I said, "Been a while, mister." And this was the first time I heard him speak. I remember he smirked and said, "It has, hasn't it?" His voice was deep and low, like James Earl Jones. Then the door slammed and he was gone. Weird stuff still happens all the time. My dad is just now starting to admit something weird is happening. Just last week, we talked about it, and he said he used to hear whispering at night and footsteps. Number 13. Good friend or bad friend? A buddy of mine was having dinner with his college professor, his professor's wife, and his professor's 4-year-old son. The 4-year-old son kept looking towards the hallway behind my friend nervously. Finally, the professor asked his son if he was seeing one of his friends. The son replied yes. Good friend or bad friend? Asked the professor. Bad friend, said the son. Why is he bad? My friend asked. The son looked at my friend and whispered, Sharp hands. Number 14. David. My daughter isn't quite old enough for imaginary friends yet, so I have to tell the story my mom told me. I don't really remember any of it. Just after my younger brother was born, as far as anyone knows anyway, I played by myself a lot as a kid. my imaginary friend showed up. I would strike up conversations, play trucks, you know, the kind of stuff kids do. One morning, while I was jabbering away on the kitchen floor, my mom asked who I was talking to. According to her, I was having a great time talking and laughing up a storm. I told her I was playing with David. I told her he looked just like me, but wasn't me, and loved to cuddle with me in bed at night. When my mom asked where he was from, I told her he was from her belly too, that we used to play there together, but he'd gone away for a while after I was born, but he came back and it was great. You know, imaginary friend stuff. Nothing spectacular. It wasn't until sophomore year of high school that I heard this story from my mom. My school gave us these things called progress reports, which showed our grades at the halfway point of the 6 weeks. They were mostly for our own knowledge, but my French teacher required us to take them home and get them signed by a parent. In foreign language class, you chose a different name to use in class. Mine was David. I was in the gradebook as David Base Product, and when I brought home the first progress report, my mom started to cry. David was my stillborn twin brother, you see. Even after all these years, she still hurts from his loss, and seeing his name so unexpectedly brought it all back. Number 15. Grandparents. My ex-husband's brother has a couple of twin girls that are really very unusual. Among other things, both grandparents on his side have been dead the whole time they've been alive. And when shown a picture of them, they said, "Oh, we know them. They play with us all the time." Also, this happens all the time with them, talking to things that aren't really there. I have a pic on my phone my ex sent me that someone took of them at the lake, and one of them is sitting down in mid-air. When her dad asked what's up with that picture, she said, "The lady said it was slippery and told me to sit on her lap so I wouldn't fall in." This is the actual picture. Number 16. Toni. When my son was 4 years old, he would always ask, "Who is that girl down the hall?" This creeped me and my husband out, because there was never anyone down the hall. One day after he asked who the girl was, I asked him what the girl looked like. My son answered, "She looks flat." A few months go by, and only a couple of times does my son ask about the girl. My husband and I blew it off until one day. Curious about the girl, I asked him whatever happened to the girl. He said, "She's Toni's sister, and he says hi." My best friend, when I was a kid, was named Toni. I saw his little sister get run over by a car when I was about 6. Toni killed himself when he was 16. Alright, my lovely lilies, thank you so much for watching the new video. If you can, hit that subscribe and like button, comment below and tell me your thoughts. Also, don't forget to tap the little notification bell so you're always in the know on this channel. As well, guys, you can always find me on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and always you can hit me up in my emails. Feel free to send me your stories, whether they're fiction or totally true. I'm always up for some great stories. And oh, by the way, until next time, sweet dreams.